welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to London International Shipping Week. Fantastic that you found your way to the IET. It's a fantastic venue, I think, and I think it's a very fitting setting for our event today. Now, London International Shipping Week, it's one of those weeks that we have a couple of times a year in the shipping industry where kind of literally everybody comes together from across the globe, from across the industry, from across the value chain to discuss maritime innovation, but also to address the urgency of transformation. And I'm not sure how it's been for you this Monday and Tuesday so far, but it's a lot of hopping on and off London cabs and buses and trains to get from one event and one reception to the other. So now it's your time to take a deep breath, enjoy the comfy seats, and to receive a big congratulations from my side, because you made it to the one event that really matters. Thank you. Warm welcome also to everybody joining us on the live stream. We already have thousands of viewers joining us online. Fantastic to have you with us as well for this coming hour, and we have a lot to talk about. I'm Anna Moschner. I'm the Communications and Marketing Director of DNV Maritime. It's my great pleasure to guide you through today's proceedings and to guide you through the 9th launch event of the Maritime Forecast to 2050. Many of you will be aware that we're publishing the report on an annual basis under the umbrella of the Energy Transition Outlook series of reports by DNV. And who would have thought 9 years ago that we would keep on going year after year after year? Why are we doing that? Because there's so much out there that needs to be addressed, that needs to be put into perspective. There's always new data, new insights to share. There's new technologies, there's new regulatory developments. So also this year, I can promise you it's very worthwhile to dive into the research and to download your personal copy and read the full report, because today we can only give you a glimpse into the key findings. And it's definitely worthwhile to check it out in more detail. Also this year, the report comes at a pivotal moment for the industry. All of you will be aware, in April, we saw the approval of the Net Zero Framework, introducing the first global pricing mechanism for greenhouse gas emissions and fuel intensity requirements. And if adopted in October, there's this tiny word, if adopted, these measures, of course, will reshape the economics of shipping, will have a massive impact on the way forward, on the shift towards cleaner fuels, energy efficiency, carbon capture technologies, you name it. So, of course, that would definitely be a game changer. Good news from my perspective, the industry is moving from ambition to action. Yes, there is still a lot of hesitation out there, for sure, a lot of uncertainty and complexity, and still we do see ship owners taking strategic investment decisions already today, translating also into an expanding alternative fuel-capable fleet. And yet, of course, there are challenges. We do see the supply of low greenhouse gas fuels still remaining far behind the demand. So there is a clear need, a clear urgency for infrastructure, but also for regulatory clarity. So plenty of stuff to talk about today. We'll try to cover a little bit of everything: policy, technology, fuels, maybe finance. It's going to be packed and hopefully insightful. So you will not get to leave this room, but I hope everybody online also stays tuned. Quick run through the agenda, and then we get started. So in a moment, you're going to hear it from the CEO of DNV Maritime. Knut-Ørbeck-Nilssen is with us today. He will give a short keynote to set the scene, to set the tone, give his view on the status of the industry, the status of the green transformation, and maybe also related challenges and opportunities. And then the moment maybe you've all been waiting for, you will get to hear it from the lead author of this year's Maritime Forecast to 2050 report. Somebody in the audience called him the guru earlier on when I talked to them. So our guru, Eirik Ovrum, will take you through the report's key findings. And then against this backdrop, We're going to have two very interesting discussions. One is a fireside chat between Knut and Arsenio Dominguez, the IMO Secretary General, will hopefully join us very shortly. He's got a very busy day. And yeah, I understand he's been a bit delayed in his agenda, but hopefully we will have him here on time to then discuss the regulatory shifts shaping the industry moving forward. And then we will round it off on a more practical note, and we have a fantastic panel put together, some industry-leading voices talking about really what it means for them, for their companies. And I mean, they are navigating these changes and challenges on the front lines every day. My fantastic colleague, the COO of DNV Maritime, Cristina Sienz de Santa Maria, will facilitate that discussion. And you can look forward to hearing it from representatives from Hanwha Ocean, JP Morgan, Hapag-Lloyd, and EPS. So, fantastic agenda, I believe. Let's get started. And to get you into the mood, you will now get to watch a short video, hopefully capturing the essence of this year's Maritime Forecast.
Momentum for a greener maritime future has been building. Yet April 2025 brought one of the industry's most defining decisions to date. The International Maritime Organization's approval of the Net Zero framework marked a pivotal moment, setting the stage for the next phase of maritime's energy transition. If adopted in October 2025, this landmark regulation introduces the world's first global pricing mechanism for greenhouse gas emissions, alongside fuel intensity requirements. Together, they will reshape the economics of shipping, strengthening the case for cleaner fuels, energy efficiency, and carbon capture technologies. To support the industry navigate this new era, this year's Maritime Forecast to 2050 presents a deep dive into the key mechanisms of the IMO Net Zero framework and explores its economic impact through the lens of a selected case vessel. Successful decarbonization demands both a map and a mirror. The new report reflects where we stand today, from the rise in zero-carbon fuel orders to advances in technology and infrastructure, and highlights the key actions that can move us closer to our 2030 goals. Today, shipping uses just 1 million tons of zero-carbon fuels per year. To reach our 2030 targets, we'll need 25 times more. A similar impact could be achieved by equipping 20 key ports to offload captured CO2 from ships. Innovation is no longer just a concept. It's already underway. New technologies like wind-assisted propulsion are already at sea, gathering experience and knowledge that can open the door to wider adoption. But no single solution will get us there. Only synchronized progress across the entire maritime ecosystem from ship to shore will drive the change we need. With regulatory clarity and growing momentum, the opportunity is ours to shape a truly sustainable future for maritime.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Great to see you and great to see so many of you here. It is indeed a pivotal moment for shipping, for the world. But let us take just a little bit of a helicopter view at where we are today. There are, in my view, 3 really important shifts that are shaping the world of shipping today. Geopolitics is playing a major role. We've seen the troubles in the Red Sea, the basically closure of the Suez Canal, Russia's aggression war in Ukraine, and this has created a market where ton miles have really gone through the roof. Also, decarbonization is really defining the regulatory agendas, and not least what happened at the IMO in April and what will happen in mid-October is certainly something that everyone is looking to and speculating and how things will pan out. But it just shows how important decarbonization is for shipping. The third shift that I would like to draw your attention to is on the technologies. We've seen and heard so much about fuels, about dual fuel engines, but there is so much more. It was mentioned in the video about carbon capture and storage, about how we can actually produce energy on board vessels with wind-assisted propulsion. And recently there's been lots of talk about artificial intelligence. And I think with all of this, and also realizing that in today's world, where we are moving at different speeds, the energy security situation is really challenging a lot of how we are addressing these things. At the core of all of this is naturally the seafarers, and we need to make sure that they stay competent, that they are confident with the work that they have to do, and not least, that they have viable and good careers at sea. Without the seafarers, the talk about shipping, about decarbonizing shipping, is really meaningless. Now, I would like to turn your attention a little bit to the fuel supply. It was mentioned. So we are basically seeing quite a bit of uptake of dual fuel engines on the new build vessels. The problem is really that there is not enough low greenhouse gas fuels being produced. And as was mentioned here, come to 2030, shipping to meet the IMO targets would basically need 1/3 of the world production of low greenhouse gas fuels. I think today shipping is consuming around 3 to 5%. And that is in a world where it's become more expensive to produce renewable energy, and where, as I mentioned, energy security is really much higher on the agenda. So maybe some of you read Tradewinds last week, where I made a comment about why are we putting roadblocks in the LNG pathway. Looking at the net zero framework as it stands today, we are really making the LNG pathway less attractive. And realizing that we have around 600 vessels sailing with dual fuel LNG engines and another 700-ish in the order book, it could lead to a situation where a lot of these assets become stranded. But not only that, there is a massive investment also on the infrastructural side. Ports have invested to facilitate the LNG storage, and also bunkering vessels are picking up in the order book. I'm not saying this because I'm an LNG fan. I'm sure that some of you think I am. But I'm saying this because in overview, it's so important that we keep all the pathways to decarbonize shipping open. And LNG is one of those pathways, especially if you can insert biomethane later on, it will have a pathway that should be attractive for quite a number of years. One of the issues around LNG is the so-called well-to-tank factors. So this is not happening on the ships. This is basically a measure to include the well-to-wake life cycle analysis of the fuel. If we are using poorly documented well-to-tank factors, it will actually phase out LNG much earlier. And there are studies based on science, based on facts, that show that these factors should not be taken as a world average, but would rather be seen in the context of relevant supply chains for LNG as fuel. Today, there is a lot of use of biofuels. That is great. It's easy to use, and it's available. The challenge that we see with biofuels is that it might not be that available in the next 10 years. There are other industries scrambling to get hold of biofuels. And that's another point why we say that also we really need to work on energy efficiency, to have every vessel use less energy. That makes a lot of sense, financially, but also in a decarbonization context. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are many obstacles on the road to decarbonization, but I think we should approach this road with pragmatism. It's difficult to find the perfect solution. And as we are trying to find better ways, let's not make the mistake of falling into the Premier League fan club discussions. Which camp do you belong in? For some, bio makes the best sense. For others, LNG is the best choice. And again, others are exploring ammonia, hydrogen, batteries, or other solutions. We need everything. And I'm very much looking forward later on this afternoon to have a discussion with Arsenio Dominguez and see how he looks at the upcoming meeting in October. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to end with one more thing that I think we talk way too little about, and that is carbon capture corridors. You probably all heard about the green fuel corridors. So we heard that carbon capture has the potential on big tankers, big bulkers, big container ship to capture around 20% of the emissions, while only utilizing reception facilities in 20 ports. And this is another pathway. We introduced it last year, but it hasn't really ticked off to a large extent. So I would hope that all of you could help us to launch that as a viable option. And then my last point is coming back to the IMO. Substantial amounts of funds will be accumulated should the net zero framework come through. We're talking maybe in the range of 10 to 15 billion US dollars per annum, maybe more. I think the industry is really desperate to learn how much of that is coming back to the industry to help innovate, to help decarbonize, and to really push energy efficiency forward. And I hope that we can shed some light on that also in our talk with Arsenio later on. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard enough of rambling from me. I would like to now welcome Eirik Ovrum, the lead author of the Maritime Forecast, to the stage. And hopefully he can give a little bit more educated and intelligent comments about the study that we have carried out. So Eirik, the scene is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Knut. Yep. Okay, so the Maritime Forecast to 2050 is one out of DNV's suite of energy transition outlook reports. And for the 9th year in a row, we present an updated outlook on regulations, drivers, technologies, and fuels for decarbonizing shipping. The stage is set for the next phase of the maritime energy transition. And while shipping is testing and rolling out new fuels and energy efficiency technologies, we await the regulations and are ready for fuel production to catch up. Waiting but not standing still, even as projects for production of low greenhouse gas fuels, low GHG fuels, are facing headwinds, shipping is moving forward. The last year has seen a continuation of LNG-capable and methanol-capable ships crowding the order book, with bio-LNG bunkered through mass balancing and methanol in simultaneous operations. Furthermore, ammonia-capable ships are entering the order book at scale, with pilots sailing and testing out bunkering. While onboard carbon capture is being piloted at full scale on the merchant ships in operation, we have wind-assisted propulsion systems that have been installed on many ships, and the number of installations is rapidly growing. These are all important developments ready to impact on the maritime industry, and from conventional ships on biodiesel to alternative fuels to onboard carbon capture or even nuclear, there are many ways to reduce emissions to meet the requirements. These options all work, but they are at different levels of maturity. They have uncertain availability, and it's unclear what the final costs will be. The last year has also seen significant regulatory development, with the EU ETS in operation, the Fuel EU Maritime implemented, and now the IMO has approved, but not yet adopted, the net zero framework, and is heading towards the first ever global pricing mechanism for greenhouse gas emissions. The net zero framework has a technical requirement on the well-to-wake emissions for the overall fuel used through the year for single ships. This is measured as grams of CO2 per unit of energy. In this metric, there is a base target, and furthermore, a stricter direct compliance target that each ship is required to meet, either by using low GHG fuels or by buying remedial units from a new IMO fund, or by buying surplus units from overperforming ships. This new IMO fund is estimated to gain an annual revenue of $10 to $15 billion from international shipping. We present a case study of a single ship operating under the IMO net zero framework, and we find that with present biofuel prices, it will be a better business case to use biofuels to meet the base target rather than to pay penalties to meet the base target. In both cases, the total fuel costs is effectively doubled by the IMO net zero framework around 2036. If using biofuels, you will need to use an increasing amount of biofuels every year as the greenhouse gas intensity requirement gets stricter and stricter, starting with 6% biofuels in 2028 for the case study ship, increasing to 78% by 2040. Under the IMO net zero framework, there is also an opportunity for ships that are overperforming the direct compliance target to sell surplus units to ships not meeting the base target. But due to the stricter carbon intensity requirements over time, this means that the amount of surplus units generated per ton of low GHG fuel fall, and therefore the economic benefits of such a strategy fall over time. And also similarly, the number of similar ships that one overperforming ship can help down to base target rapidly falls. For an LNG version of our case study ship, with our estimates of biodiesel and bio-LNG prices, we find that the strategy of maximal use of bio-LNG for selling surplus units can be economically viable up until 2031, even without so-called ZNZ rewards or premium rates for green transport. Now, in this year's report, we focus on large bulkers, tankers, and container ships, as they represent more than half of the world fleet's emissions. While, of course, we must never forget that while larger ships, of course, have large emissions, they are more efficient in transporting a ton of cargo. And this means that decarbonizing the transport of 1 ton of cargo is less costly for larger ships. For the total order book of all ships, we find that half by tonnage are dual fuel capable. But there are significant differences between the ship segments, with 3/4 of large container vessels being dual fuel capable, and 1 in 5 large tankers, and only 1 in 20 large bulkers. And the higher uptake of dual fuel capable ships in the container segment indicates a higher willingness for cargo owners to pay for reduced emissions. We also see that the total amount of alternative fuel capable ships in the world fleet, that means ships that not only can use oil fuels like VLSFO or biodiesel, that total number will almost double by 2028, requiring additional training for 33,000 seafarers over the next 3 to 4 years. And we also have, based on this, estimated the total amount of alternative non-oil fuels the world fleet can consume in 2030, based on existing ships and AIS analysis and their annual fuel consumption, added together estimates from the order book. In total, the world fleet consumes about 280 million ton oil equivalent of fuel. And we find that the world fleet could maximally, in 2050, consume 50 million ton oil equivalent of alternative non-oil fuels, which would be 18% of the total fuel consumption. But we must always remember that alternative fuels are not the same as low GHG fuels. Now let's turn from the development of the world fleet to development of the production of low GHG fuels. And on the slide here you can see our estimates for supply over the next years for the different fuel types. And the IMO Net Zero framework could provide the necessary regulatory certainty for investments in low GHG fuel production. In total, we estimate that by 2030, the total world supply of low GHG fuels will be between 70 and 100 million ton oil equivalent. We also estimate that shipping would require 25 million ton oil equivalent in order to meet IMO's 2030 target, which would be around 1/3 of total global cross-sector supply across all industries, while keeping in mind that shipping represents 3% of the world's energy use. Today, biodiesel and biomethane dominate low GHG fuel supply, and in the short term will be the most accessible for shipping. We see that the order book for fuel production projects is strong, especially for hydrogen, which can be used as a feedstock to make the other fuels. But we see that the growth in the project pipeline has stalled, with only 4% of hydrogen-based fuel production projects having reached a final investment decision. Carbon intensity. Different chain of custody models with variable degrees of flexibility can be used. In the EU, mass balancing opens the door for purchasing of bio-LNG, even if the bunker methane comes from a fossil source. By having flexible chains of custody, we increase availability of low GHG fuels, and we reduce investments in transport and bunkering infrastructure. As an example, in the EU, 4.3 million ton oil equivalent of biomethane is produced. This could be used as fuel for ships, and by allowing full flexibility, 13% of that energy could be saved that would otherwise be needed to liquefy biomethane and regasify LNG for the gas grid. And with competition globally for climate-friendly energy, it's important to understand what the different uses of renewable and nuclear electric energy can have for different climate-friendly purposes. It's not only low GHG fuels for shipping that needs climate-friendly energy. On this slide, you can see the greenhouse gas reduction from using 1 kilowatt-hour of clean electric energy for different purposes. We find that direct applications of electricity gives much more greenhouse gas reduction than e-fuel production. And for shipping, shore power, using 1 kilowatt-hour of electricity for shore power or for charging of battery-powered plug-in hybrid ships, although not relevant for deep-sea shipping, gives 4 times the amount of CO2 reduction as using that kilowatt-hour to produce e-fuels. Of course, the cheapest fuel is the fuel not used, but for wind-assisted propulsion systems to be a success, they need to demonstrate a reasonable payback period. With claims of 5 to 20% reduction in fuel use and reward factors from the Fuel EU Maritime and the IMO Net Zero framework, the benefits could outweigh the costs. Today, there are several third-party verification tests ongoing for a range of different technologies, all aiming to accurately measure and quantify the benefits of wind, because it's very hard to generalize for different ships sailing in different areas with different prevailing winds and at different speeds. On the left here, you can see the number of ships sailing, pun definitely intended, with different sailing technologies. And on the right, you can see that there are large differences between the ship types that are testing out modern sails. With regulations in place and a rapidly increasing number of ships to gain experience from, this could be a breakthrough year for wind. Now, let's go over to the question of onboard carbon capture and this question of CO2 storage space on ships. So, by analyzing existing LNG fuel tank installations on large bulkers, tankers, and container ships, while assuming that that same volume could be used for storing captured CO2 instead, we find realistic volumes of how much CO2 could be captured on each voyage of these ships. That could afterwards then be offloaded in a port with CO2 receiving infrastructure. And we have performed AIS analysis for all voyages starting and ending in 2024 for all of these large bulkers, tankers, and container ships. If all ports have CO2 receiving infrastructure, we find that 600 tankers could store all the CO2 produced on the longest voyage. while the majority of tankers could capture most of the CO2 produced through the year. In general, we see that a significant share of these large ships could capture most of the CO2 produced through the year. Importantly, of course, not all ports will have CO2 receiving infrastructure early on, but these ships can install carbon capture equipment on board and then gradually increase the amount of CO2 they capture through the year as the logistics for CO2 receiving infrastructure is increased and built out. Which leads us to our next analysis. But first, let's take a look at the global developments, and we see that CO2 storage for land-based industries is in operation, and the volumes are expanding. For maritime, there is regulatory progression. Onboard carbon capture is allowed and counted for in the EU ETS, and they will consider it for the fuel in maritime in 2027. There's also progress in the IMO, where a work plan to develop a regulatory framework has been approved. Now, on the previous slide, we assumed that all ports could receive the CO2, and we estimated how much each ship could reduce its emissions. Now, let's do it the other way around, and instead we say that all of these large bulkers, tankers, and container ships have CO2 capture equipment. And then we use the AIS analysis and all their voyages in 2024 to find the total amount of CO2 we could reduce emissions from the world fleet by, for a given number of the busiest ports having CO2 receiving infrastructure. And we find that by having as few as 20 major ports having CO2 receiving infrastructure, we could reduce emissions from large bulkers, tankers, and container ships by 19%, which would be the same as reducing the world fleet emissions by 9%. And coincidentally, this would be the same as using 25 million ton oil equivalent of low GHG fuels, which is what we estimate is needed to meet IMO's 2030 target. To summarize, our key findings are that the IMO net zero framework will effectively double fuel costs by around 2036. And the production of low GHG fuels is facing headwinds, with only 4% of hydrogen-based fuel production projects having reached a final investment decision. One way to accelerate the uptake of low GHG fuels is by having flexible chains of custody in the shipping industry. Onboard carbon capture can also help, and we estimate that with the receiving infrastructure in only 20 major ports, we could reduce emissions from large bulkers, tankers, and container ships by 19%. Could this be a breakthrough year for wind? We have 50 installations so far and another 100 on the order book. And finally, it's important to note that the direct application of electricity gives much more greenhouse gas reduction than e-fuel production. And finally, as we stand at the cusp of international global CO2 price in shipping, our recommendations for ship owners stand. Ship owners should reduce energy consumption now, consider all decarbonization options, focus on fuel flexibility, and consider long-term fuel strategies. Thank you. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Eirik. Fantastic presentation. Very kind of nice and concise, because there's so much more content and insight to be found in the report that you will all download once you leave this room later on. Thank you so much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to be able to welcome back on stage Knut, who will now get to host a fireside chat with the IMO Secretary General, who made it. Mr. Arsenio Dominguez is here, shaking hands first and then making his way up on the stage. I'm glad we gave you a few minutes to catch your breath before you come and join us here, because I know it's a very busy day for you. So there's loads to talk about. I'll leave it to the two gentlemen. Give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you, Arsenio Dominguez, Secretary General of the IMO. I think we all know what the IMO is these days. It's been a very remarkable year. Last time we spoke was during SMM 1 year ago. You probably won't remember, but
I do.
Thank you.
It's a smaller room than this one.
But what a year it has been. So much has happened. And by the way, nice selection of color on your suit.
Yes, we didn't coordinate, by the way. Pure coincidence.
What about your shoes?
I know I'm not as trendy as you are. I need to learn.
Anyway, let's get down to some business talk. So it has been a very important year for the IMO and for the world of shipping. And with the MEPC vote in April, what are your reflections on the lack of consensus and the necessity for voting to get the net zero framework across the finish line? And there are a few more questions to this. And what are your expectations for the adoption meeting next month? And do you worry that political division among member states could block progress?
How about a pen and paper? Because I can't keep up with this. You may have to remind me some of the questions now.
So what was the reflections on the lack of consensus? Let's start there.
So let's start over there. First of all, I know you're launching the report today.
Maritime Forecast.
The Maritime, yes. Next time, do share in advance. It will prepare me better for this exchange. So I don't know why we have to look at what happened in April in a negative way. Let me start over there. There is consensus to move forward. There are disagreements in some areas, and we have those member states that have agreed to the compromise approach, if I can put it that way, on the understanding that is further work to do, that this is not something that is going to happen overnight. The member states that consider that this may have a negative impact in shipping or in the global economy. Others member states consider that we're not going far enough and we're actually not going to meet the goals of decarbonizing. But this is what we do at IMO. And you're all also focusing on, I think you call it the vote next October. Which you must know more than I do, because I call it the session where we're going to adopt the amendments. How we do it, we have several mechanisms, and voting is one of those that exists in international law, in the law of the treaties. In several countries, we actually even vote as well to elect officials. So I don't know why we get to the point where having a vote, it's suddenly a negative thing. It actually recognizes that we give everyone the opportunity to express their opinion, to raise their concerns. We have had votes in the past at IMO. This is not the first time. I always will campaign that, of course, we don't reach to that point, but I respect that if member states want to have very clear, specific decisions on certain topics, and that means using some of the articles of the conventions, they have the right to do so. I'm still confident that we will continue to move forward. Next October, we have areas that further work needs to be done, concerns that we need to take note of and then act upon it. But it doesn't mean that we're divided. The organization continues working forward in the same objective that it was agreed back in 2023. And of course, as we progress and as countries also, together with the industry, learn from the implementation of this, and we hit the marks of all the goals that demonstrated, that was my interpretation, that we can achieve the goal by around 2050, then we're on the next step. But I don't see it as a negative. It's part of the process. I think it actually, also, this transparency that exists and that we're highlighting even more at the organization. We will still look always for consensus. If every now and then we have to do the articles of the conventions, it's part of the process.
Understand. And you are optimistic it will be adopted in October?
Do I have to repeat it again? Yes.
I just wanted to highlight it.
No, that's absolutely fine. I am optimistic, very positive that this will happen next October. That's next month, right? Yes. Trying to remember what I am right now.
So, yeah.
And of course, taking on board all the information that we continue to gather, the concerns that are out there, the additional explanations that will be developed through the implementation guidelines, and then by 2027, with the entry into force, we will be in an even better place. We've been asked to provide more and more clarity, and trust me, I think the more we do, the more we're requested as well.
That's natural. Yeah. Thank you very much, Arsenio, for being very clear on that. I didn't expect anything less, but it's really good to hear from you.
Can I ask you back at some point then if you agree with me?
Yeah, but
it's a fireside chat. It goes both ways.
But for now, I'm asking the questions, all right?
It's all right. I'm used to this. Don't take anything personal. A good relationship here.
Yeah. But let's now assume that you are correct. It will be adopted.
Whoa, no. Asking the questions is one thing. Interpreting what I'm saying is different. You can't assume if I'm correct. That's not how we're going to move forward.
I think this is going to be difficult to keep on time, Arsenio.
I've been late on every single event today.
Let me put it this way. So the Net Zero Fund will collect a significant amount of money. And we just heard it's in the range of 10 to 15 billion US dollar per year or more. Now, the industry is naturally very concerned how those funds will be managed, how much will come back to the shipping industry, how much will be used to continue to innovate and develop decarbonization pathways for the industry. And some are very concerned that this might only be, say, eligible for niche decarbonization projects and not at all for energy efficiency projects. What's your view?
That we have a very good framework already established in the IMO GHG strategy of 2023, as well as in the regulations that will be adopted next month, where we highlighted the fact that there is a reward mechanism. I can't give you percentages or specific figure if you ask me right now. There are questions that I cannot answer, and I don't have a problem explaining that. But it's part of the negotiations that we will continue to have. But we have outlined the rewards mechanisms that it will go back into the industry as well, particularly the early movers and those going for the green technologies, as well as the zero and net zero, near zero fuels. Infrastructure development when it comes to ports, bunkering. You mentioned now reception facilities, which is also within the MARPOL Convention, so that's another area for us to support. Research and development, and that includes fuels as well as the technology. The just and equitable transition, and here in particular the small island developing states, least developed countries, training, because we need to support the workforce as well. I think you talked about, I was paying attention, 33,000 seafarers that need training and upscaling by 2030. Again, this is one of those areas where we will be able to support it. When we're going into these negotiations, again, they're going to be inclusive. We always have the member states present there. There will be a board that, of course, has been agreed, will provide that guidance. The shipping industry is represented on these discussions, and of course, your input is always welcome, it's always heard of, and we act upon it. We can't please everybody. That doesn't mean that if some input comes in and is not reflected in the outcome for any discussion, not just on the environment, it's because we need to find consensus and we need to manage that. For transparency, it is expected as well that IMO is the one that is going to take the lead in managing the fund. And of course, I'm already working with my team in relation of the proposals that we can put forward to the member states. This sounds simplistic, okay? But I do like sometimes just not to complicate our lives. We have experiences of all the funds of the organizations. We have experiences with the internal funds that we manage. Yes, the amount will be different, but then is the administration and the support that we will receive from those that also have the experience and that we can partner with in order to actually do what we say and that we had agreed that we're going to do, is collect this between $10 and $12 billion a year is what we calculate. I like your 15. That sounds better for some member states that consider that we need to go further. And that would allow us to reinvest into the sector. And we have agreed to that we need to support the decarbonization of the sector. And I've been very open. Once we help the sector, when we move to that, then we can explore if there is anything else that we can do, as the shipping sector is quite broad.
Are you familiar with the concept that we introduced on carbon capture corridors? Is this also something that could be
Carbon
funded?
capture corridors.
So we say that. So we say that.
Was that at the time that I arrived or before I arrived?
Maybe just before you arrived, to be kind.
He didn't share the report with me in advance.
No, but the point was that if you consider the large bulker tankers and container ships, if you are able to have reception facilities in 20 ports, yes, you can basically reduce emission by 20%.
Which again continues to demonstrate that there are several actions that we can put in place in order to meet the goals. I think on the numbers was even saying that that will be the equivalent of the 25 million tons that will be required to meet the 2030. I'm speaking very fast. I'm trying to remember what I just heard. And this is where we continue to support the establishment of the Green Maritime Corridors, to provide us with that feedback, that information that can benefit the way that the rules are going to evolve. Yeah.
Very good. I would like to I'm not sure whether you read Tradewinds, but I got a heading last week.
Oh, did you? I didn't know.
Yeah, no, might be just as good. It says that I slammed the IMO. Don't take any offense.
I don't take anything personal. Do you think that I will be sitting here?
But what I said was that why put roadblocks in the LNG pathway? And the point is that we see that especially the well-to-tank factors that are being discussed at the moment are very high, maybe undocumented. And there are studies out there that show that more realistic upstream chains will produce much lower well-to-tank factors. And that might sound like a trivial thing, but it has a big impact on how long the LNG pathway will be. And considering the millions, billions of investments going into both the port infrastructure, ships, and bunkering vessels, what's your reflections on that? Is that something that could be worked with?
So I do read the news. That's fair to say, right? And don't worry, in reality, the reality is I don't take anything personal. That's what IMO is there about. I prefer that you offload on us and you stay together rather than you create divisions among yourselves. It's the same thing that I say to the member states. LNG. There are those that are in favor of LNG, and of course you will know as well that there has been a real push at IMO to basically ban LNG, and that is not a fuel that is going to lead us to the results that we expect. I continue to reiterate that LNG, I see it as a transition fuel and a fuel in transition. And it was mentioned as well in the report when we talk about bio-LNG. You mentioned that right now we're still discussing, so we haven't finalized all the relevant aspects in relation to the life cycle assessments of the different fuels, and that includes LNG. There's something that we also need to recognize is that, yes, LNG provides additional benefits, but it's still a carbon-based fuel, still have issues, even though we're enhancing when it comes to methane, but the negative emissions from LNG have to be addressed. And if at some point the reality is that some contributions for the use of LNG, it's required as well to further enhance the viability of the fuel, that's something that we will have in the organization. But the door has not been closed. We haven't closed the door on LNG. It's now being perceived that this is one of those areas where the regulation is trying to phase him out, but it's not the case. Even with what we have on the table right now, you can see that we're not phasing out conventional fuels, because we acknowledge that we are going through a transition fuels are evolving, technology, carbon capture and sequestration was very well highlighted here, is going to assist, and we need every little help in order to meet this challenging goal. Are necessary, but still challenging goal. But that's my view of LNG. It's still a field that we are working, and we expect to continue to work, and that I'm also hoping that it will progress as we move forward.
Thank you. I think it's important that we at the IMO, but also we in the industry, keep all pathways open, because it's such a big difference whether you're a big container vessel owner operating between A and B, or whether you're in the tramp shipping and you don't basically have any clarity on where you operate. So,
can I praise you there for the
please.
Closing remarks on the recommendations towards the ship owners? Because I think that those key points that were the closing slide are very good in relation to the consumption. You know, you said that the fuel that the best saving is the fuel that is not used. The strategies for the fuels for the future, to use all the possible technologies that are there. That is quite a really good and positive message, because that's what we've been calling for at the organizations before we adopted the 2023 strategy into the early movers, the incentives that we expect from the governments, from the industry, the private sector, etc. on this. So I really appreciate that positive closure with all the challenges and the areas that are there in the report. But we're looking at this is, you know, a forward-looking report, and things will evolve and get better as we learned as well.
Thank you very much, Arsenio. I really appreciate that you took the time to join me on this fireside chat without a fire.
Are we running out of time already? I was just getting started here.
Yeah, I wish we could have continued, but we could do it next year again.
Oh, will you have me next year?
Look at your shoes and maybe we'll...
Okay, so I'll change the shoes and I'm allowed to ask you questions as well.
Okay, is that the deal?
Deal. I have several witnesses here.
Thank you so much, Arsenio. It was a great pleasure to have you, and thank you for spending the time. And please give Arsenio a big hand, and we are supporters of the IMO. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was really good. Hope you enjoyed it.
I'll give you a report.
Thank you. Yeah, we were out of time, by the way. Way over, but we could have listened for so much longer. Great pleasure, very insightful and also entertaining. So looking forward to next year already. But we can't leave it there, can we? We've talked research and insights, we've now talked policy and regulations, but we really need to talk about practical implementation and what it really means for everybody in the industry. So for that, we have now invited a fantastic panel of leading industry voices who will give their view, who will share a little bit from their backgrounds and companies, and of course that's extremely relevant. To guide us through this discussion, I'm now pleased to hand over to Cristina Sáenz de Santa Maria, the COO of DNV Maritime, already making her way up on the stage. That's fantastic. Cristina, welcome. And if I could also ask the panelists to slowly make their way up the stairs, and you don't need to rush. I will do my little commercial break while you come up on stage. You may download the Maritime Forecast at dnv.com/Maritime Forecast. It's for free. You can spread the word. There's more insights on our website to be found, so by all means check it out. Or you just ask all of us. We DNV people will be around a little longer after this event. And everybody's seated, so I'll give it away. Welcome, everybody, and over to Cristina.
Thank you so much, Anna. And welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be moderating today the panel of London International Shipping Week, and having with me these industry leaders and experts. So we have with us today Claire Wright, who is the Managing Director of Hanwha Ocean in Europe. We have Andy Dacey, CIO, Global Head of Transportation, JP Morgan Asset Management. Silke Lindkoster, Managing Director, Fleet of Hapag-Lloyd. And Mirko Spasov, Manager of Decarbonization of Eastern Pacific Shipping. Now, we meet at a critical moment for shipping. The IMO Net Zero Framework, which has already been named several times today, and I'm sure we will keep mentioning them during this week and the next weeks to come. It was approved in April, as we have heard, as we know. It's up for adoption. We have heard very positive signals and thoughts that it will go forward in October. And if it does, it will really shape the future of the maritime decarbonization. But still, there are fuel supply issues, cost issues, technology issues, regulation issues that are really pressing the industry. Again, our panel really brings a lot of expertise, and today we're going to try to address the readiness of the industry, regulations, the technology, and possible path forward. So let's begin with the headline issue, again, the IMO Net Zero Framework. I was going to say in my notes, if it gets approved, I feel that now I need to be a bit more positive when it gets approved. Anyhow, I would like to hear your views on whether is the industry ready for this, and how are your organizations handling? Maybe Mirko, you can start.
Sure. It seems that it's going to be a challenge, obviously. The industry is continuing to build expertise in the space, but there's still a lot of fleets that operate purely conventional fuels are only now starting to make the first foray into alternative fuels, including LNG. Just on our side, we've been fortunate to have focused for most of the last decade on reducing our emissions and decarbonizing. And we have now gone through our first dry dock cycle with our first dual-fuel LNG container vessels. They've been in our fleet for 5-6 years already. We've completed 450 bunker operations, and a small but increasing number of those have been incorporating bio-LNG. Okay. And so we've been learning a lot in the process, but there's still a long way to go. And of course, we're not stopping here. The industry needs to move and adopt other fuels as well in the future. And we're working very closely with our technology partners and, most importantly, our seafarers on launching our first ammonia dual-fuel vessels in a couple of years.
Very good. And how are they feeling, the seafarers, about that?
They obviously, some of them have concerns. Yeah. Some of them are eager to be part of the new technology. And so it's very important to have them very early on in the dialogue. We've been carrying ammonia as a cargo on our vessels for more than 10 years. So that gives us a bit of a head start in terms of understanding some of those safety concerns more than others. But it definitely will require a lot of effort and proper training to ensure it's done as safe as possible.
Perfect. We will be following up. Thank you. Silke, from your side.
Yes, I think decarbonization is nothing new to the industry. We have all read the assignments. I think most of us also accepted the challenge by now. It is a challenge, but we need to go forward on it. And as you rightfully said, we have also trained the seafarers, at least for LNG preparation or operations on board. We will take further steps for other technologies that we implement on board. Same we did with the shoreside personnel, because I think it is vital that shore and sea always know how to speak to each other and on what terms also, about what. When I then look, yes, we have invested, or we started investing in our fleet, in our assets. We have also implemented the regulations around the CII, EU ETS, so we know by now how to work with legal frameworks on emissions and so on. So bottom line, I would say now comes the reality check with the adoption of the IMO framework. Was all of our preparation enough? And where do we have the gaps to fill in the future?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Andy, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think, look, we're very early stage in this process, and is it a lofty goal, the net zero framework? Absolutely, we should definitely be leaning in that direction. But I always feel that, in my opinion at least, there's going to be a disconnect between what we're hoping to achieve and what we can actually achieve in short amounts of time. And 2030, those of you who are getting older, like I've experienced, comes very quickly. 5 years isn't like what it used to be. We're going to be there very quickly, and the complexity of a lot of this is very high, and the costs are extremely high. And I use one example, which is one extra million tons of ammonia production. It used to be about 4 or 5 years ago, about $1 billion of FID. That's probably about 1 to 1.5 billion today. So 180 million tons of ammonia produced each year. Just to take that 10 to 15 billion that's going to be produced by the Net Zero Framework Fund, you're not really making that big of a dent. And that's traditional ammonia production. That's not using sort of renewable energy to produce ammonia production. And I sometimes feel like there's more constituents that have to be part of this discussion. Sure, the ship owners are very important, and we're sort of the nexus to a certain extent, but the fuel producers, and they never really seem to be in these conferences, and they frankly should be. The end users ultimately are going to be footing the cost. And just the infrastructure, right? We're not even talking about the infrastructure costs. So I think, and not to say that we don't appreciate the enormity of these issues, but they're there. And I often feel that sometimes we sort of wave it off a little bit, and we have charts that say, oh, we'll produce this fuel and it'll be available here, and so on and so forth. And not to say that, for example, I love this carbon capture corridor concept, and more innovative, sort of very detailed, specific things like that are what we need, and we can't lose sight, of course, of all the sort of small things that we're doing to lower emissions, but the big ones, the ammonia, the hydrogen, those are, I think, probably going to take a little longer than we expect them to. And that's been what I wrestle with on a daily basis. And I said at the beginning, we absolutely should lean into this heavily, but we should be extremely realistic about what it is that we're undertaking.
Thank you. So we are ready, or we are not ready?
As was just said, we're at the beginning of potentially maybe thinking about being ready. So.
Okay. It's a first step. It's a first step. Thank you.
Yeah.
Claire, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it is a question of who are we asking to be ready. If I speak from a technology developer point of view, the technologies already exist for different propulsions. I think the challenge for owners today is they're having to make a choice of which propulsion they use. Even dual fuel is a choice of which technology, which fuel will mature in the trades that owner is working on. So the technologies are there for onboard carbon capture and storage, energy efficiency for different fuel propulsions, fuel cells, batteries for different applications. I think the challenge from a developer point of view is we are developing multiple pathways simultaneously, and that comes at a cost without knowing which ones will actually mature in terms of commercial deployment from a ship owner perspective in terms of wanting to buy those. And that makes it tough for us to essentially decide how we allocate our engineering resource. But I think the barrier or the factor that will influence that is not necessarily the availability of the technology. It is the availability of the fuels where that particular owner needs them. We've already seen that those that have moved further ahead are those with a closer link to the end consumer, where they are making readiness and dual fuel choices and sourcing fuels. But obviously there are other sectors that bunker in a wide variety of places where those decisions are harder to make.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you. And again, I was going to say in my notes, if it gets adopted, based on the previous conversations, when it gets adopted, might I say, in a more positive, there's still a lot of work to be done, right, in terms of shaping the guidelines. What parts of the regulations do you feel that need particular focus?
I think from our point of view, obviously, the IMO is fuel and technology neutral, as it should be, so we're developing different pathways. I think probably the big one from our point of view, Arsenio Dominguez mentioned it himself, it's the life cycle analysis, so that we can understand the pathways for each fuel and the timings at which fuels will be both available and required by ships, and when they may have endpoints. The other one for us in terms of developing a range of new technologies from gas turbine engines that can use ammonia, followed by hydrogen, potentially fuel cells, batteries, is how will that GFI fund be deployed to essentially enable the development of new technologies and the acceleration of their deployments. That probably is from a technology developer point of view, the one that is uncertain. I think the other point which is very linked to that is, obviously that's talking about new builds. There is still a very large fleet of existing vessels. Will that fund be available to enable us to look at, well, how do we really cost-effectively improve the performance of those ships so that we're not, as an industry, being asked to prematurely scrap ships before the end of their commercial life?
Thank you. Andy, any thoughts?
I mean, if we're prematurely scrapping ships, I'm not sure where we're going to be able to build additional ships to replace the ships that we're prematurely scrapping. And I'm just sort of coming off of the point you made there, but as we all know, there were serious issues in terms of labor capacity in places like Korea, South Korea, as well as Japan, and then certainly more issues around China as a viable source of shipping. And I think it will continue to be a source of shipbuilding, but obviously geopolitics is impacting that. But and maybe that's a good point to mention, is that there is a broader world. Knut talked about the impact of geopolitics with the Red Sea and, of course, what's happening in Ukraine. And I think that if nothing else, the last 5 years has shown us that humans have a hard time getting along with each other. And that's been, frankly, good for shipping. So the pressure on supply will probably continue to be the case, at least now, especially in a world where maybe some large country that historically provided a bit of a policeman type of role globally is not doing that as much anymore, or is sporadic in how it does it. And so a more multipolar world probably leads to more geopolitical risk and more tension and probably more pressure on shipping supply, which oddly is good for the industry because it provides probably higher charter rates. But against this backdrop, we're also trying to implement this very noble cause that we're all talking about here. And I wonder to what extent these speak loud. Oh, there we go. These geopolitical risks are going to put pressures that we're not anticipating on the net zero transition. And again, I'm just getting back to my earlier point, which is I fear that the very jovial conversation between Knut and Arsenio a few minutes ago, you roll ahead to 2030 and replace Knut with the shipping industry and Arsenio with the broader sort of regulatory framework. And, we just need to make sure that we're working in lockstep through this next 5 years, because I think there are big challenges that we're perhaps just underestimating, as I mentioned. So maybe that's my theme for today.
Thank you. Mirko, your views?
Yeah, just to echo some of the opinions that have been expressed, obviously completing the life cycle assessment for key fuels like LNG with a very scientific, rigorous approach, taking the emotions out of it to make sure we have an adequate baseline is one important aspect. Second is the chain of custody and certification models for the various fuels, including biofuels and synthetic fuels. That will be very important as to the efficiency with which you can manage these bunkering operations on a global basis. And finally, the use of proceeds, of course, from the funds that are being collected. Yes. A robust mechanism would give a lot more confidence and staying power for the mechanism.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now we have heard from Eirik, also Knut has mentioned it, that the fleet that is able to consume low greenhouse gas fuel is growing, but still we are lagging behind in terms of infrastructure and that green fuel supply. So Silke, maybe you can share with us what's the biggest challenges that Hapag-Lloyd is facing in that respect, and how are you bridging that gap to close it?
Yeah, we have a certain network that we are operating in, and of course with our fleet or with our vessels we would like to have the maximum of flexibility into it. So we don't want to be bound to, for example, one specific port where we could bunker, let it be green methanol or ammonia in the future, or even LNG, where we also started off with one port worldwide where we could fuel our first LNG vessel. But we need more flexibility, otherwise this does not work for our customers, but also for our colleagues in the network planning. So aside of the availability that we need for fuel, we also need the flexibility, and all of that together shall come at a price where it actually makes sense to buy this kind of fuel. Because by the end of the day, we also have customers who must be willing to pay on this one. And on the other hand, we also need the certainty in planning. How much will the fuel cost us, and how much also might it be if we need to divert on the route for it. So bottom line, we say we need to stay fuel agnostic. We will not put all bets on one single card. We have conventional fuel with biofuels in the fleet for the moment. We are looking into LNG/biomethane. We are retrofitting to methanol next year. We have even started looking into ammonia vessels very cautiously.
Okay.
But we don't want to leave out any type of fuel for the future. Also not the carbon capture. We have looked into that wind-assisted propulsion on container vessels. Also did a deep dive on that one. So it is key to stay broad-minded. And then the second key for success is that as a ship owner, you get direct access to the fuel. And that is also why we decided to invest directly into the fuel supply chain and made a deal with Goldwyn on green methanol that will be supplied, of course, not today, but in the future when we also think that we are ready with our vessels on the other side. But if you do not have this direct access to green fuel in the future, you don't have the availability, you don't have a certainty on the price, and that's why we believe it is really vital to also move away from a pure focus on shipping and the fleet, but also on fuel accessibility.
Thank you. Claire, what about from your side?
Yes, I think our biggest challenge is around, Silke very kindly mentioned a whole range of technologies. Obviously, as a technology developer, shipyard, retrofitter, we have to develop those technologies. And we work in a variety of different segments in shipping, all of which are choosing different solutions. And the sequencing of those solutions obviously is very different across different fleets. Those that are closer to the end consumer generally are moving further ahead. But then there are those that are still focused on energy efficiency and conventional fuel, which is right for them at this particular point. So from our point of view, the challenges are really around what to develop and when, and how will we commercialize what we are developing. And certainly in October, I hope that will give us more certainty on the timelines, because for a ship owner, the constraint is around crew training and crew development. For us, it's around engineering resource and being able to deploy that engineering resource where it meets the customer's needs at the moment. But when we're dealing with ship owners ranging from small ferry operators in Europe looking at batteries and fuel cells to large container ship operators looking at energy efficient technologies plus, say, methanol or ammonia dual fuel, that's quite a range of engineering that we need to deploy for our customers. So having some certainty around which ones will mature and when. And also, I think that does link into, as Andy said, around the fuel, what fuels will be available for the industry, and that will help us channel the work that we're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Claire. Andy, as a ship owner with a large fleet, there are opportunities and challenges with any transition. What are those for you and your organization?
We've talked about a lot of them, but I was just going to echo what's been said. I think there is low-hanging fruit. I know for us, for example, we've invested in dual-fuel methanol vessels, and certainly we could debate sort of the viability of that longer term. And I think, just to take that as an example, one of the biggest challenges is getting qualifying carbon to inject into the production process, and there's not a lot of qualifying carbon available these days to actually be part of a green methanol production supply chain. So yet again, sort of a component that's outside of the actual production process. But we're working in our case together with large end users, oil majors or energy majors that have made their own commitments to producing the green methanol. So I think that's an example of partnerships that are important with end users that are willing to spend the time and the money and the resources to develop that. LNG, as was talked about, we've done dual-fueled LNG carriers of different, sort of small chemical tankers, for example, and one of the challenges there, for example, when you did have a big geopolitical disruption like the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, LNG, as you all remember, spiked quite dramatically, and we didn't burn a molecule of LNG, I think, for about 1.5 years because it was so expensive, which brings the whole cost factor into the equation. And I think cost is broad-based. I think generally speaking, setting even this entire decarbonization trajectory to the side, if we weren't even doing this, I think costs are on their way up. We've seen persistent high ship new building prices. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. I don't think yards are proliferating anywhere near like they did if you go back 20 or 30 years ago. And those of us that have been in the industry, used to always be, the quote was, yard capacity was infinite, and that was the sort of ultimate Achilles heel of the industry, because when rates were high, everybody went and built 1,000 ships and then destroyed the market the next year. But that can't happen anymore for all the reasons that we're familiar with. So I think ship prices will be persistently high. I think crew also is going to be a big issue going forward. OpEx is not going down anytime soon. Not only are there the training requirements that we've talked about, but there's just the accessibility to crew. And I'm sure as all of us who are ship owners are experiencing, getting qualified crew from some of the traditional sources is not as easy as it used to be. And we just made a big investment in a large ship manager, OSM Tome, and one of the biggest drivers of that was accessing the big crewing operation that they have in Manila in the Philippines. But my point, I think, is that crew are now, asking rightfully for better conditions and for higher wages, and that's going to be going on. And then you add the additional training into that, that'll increase the costs even more. So I do think we're on this trajectory of high costs for all the reasons we're talking about, and that's something we have to incorporate into our thought process. So these are the types of things that we think about, especially with a large fleet like we have. And all of that is going to have to get reflected ultimately in charter rates at some point in the future. And on top of that, you have this fleet now, and hopefully I'll finish my point here in a moment, but that is comprised not just of the higher priced ships that have been built since 2020, but also of ships that were built in a previous era, pre-pandemic, that were arguably priced at lower prices, which still reflect the majority of the vessels out there. So we're having to build new higher cost ships against a market that's pricing off an average fleet price that is reflective of roughly 80% of the world fleet that's been built at a lower cost basis. So I think that's where you're seeing this big disconnect between charter rates and ship prices, and it'll take some time, in my opinion, for the percentage of the fleet to reflect these higher cost, decarbonizing oriented vessels that we're all trying to focus on today. So that gap, just from a pure economic perspective, is something that I struggle with in terms of how do you spend the money on all these different things that are so important when the charter rate market is still pricing off ships that were built in 2015.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. The report that we have presented today demonstrates how solutions like wind-assisted propulsion, onboard carbon capture and storage really contribute, into the maritime decarbonization journey. Michko, how is EPS taking into account these solutions in your decarbonization strategy, and how are you looking at the business case for them?
Sure, I'll pick up on wind first. We see wind as very much complementary to the alternative fuels. It's a source of energy on board, and we think it's applicable both for conventionally fueled vessels, but also for alternatively fueled vessels. If you consider a ship with wind-assisted propulsion on, say, not particularly attractive route, you might get a payback period of almost 10 years, just simply based on fuel savings alone. But if you take into account the same ship sailing on alternative fuels, that may be 2 or 3 times more expensive. The payback period shortens dramatically. Similarly, if you take into account the full cost of regulation that might add carbon taxes, whether it's EU ETS, FuelEU, EU, or preferential treatment under the IMO Net Zero framework, you have to take all of these into account when you do the business case and really look at on a life cycle basis, how do you ensure the lowest possible abatement cost and economic operation of your vessel? Maybe on the carbon capture side to add, it's heartening to see that we're moving beyond the period where we're very focused on can we make it technologically work on board, to can we make a fully self-sustaining supply chain that can take the CO2, deliver it, reuse it or sequester it, and focus on the business case. So the industry has moved beyond proving the technological capability on board and into proving the business case, which is the next challenge and something very important.
Perfect, but you're going to keep trying them?
We need to keep trying.
Yes, I look forward to seeing how that goes. We need to start wrapping up, but I would like to close up with a question and hearing thoughts from every one of you, maybe starting with you, Claire. Going back to the current geopolitical situation, right, and times of uncertainty. So how do you see the new building orders and the retrofits playing out in the future?
So
how do you see that evolving and the trend?
I was going to say, when the vote happens.
Okay, yes. Okay, yes, when.
That's what I
Yeah. Now we say when.
Not assuming.
No.
From a new build perspective, since April, actually, we've seen a bit of a split. So we've seen in the close to consumer markets like containers, they're still continuing with the energy efficiency, the dual fuel. On the tanker side, we've actually seen a step back to conventional and a focus on energy efficiency because of the uncertainty around what the pathways will be and what the regulation will be, as well as the support of the full value chain, both from a chartering perspective and also from the fuel supply perspective. So one thing I hope from the regulation coming in is it will give us the certainty on what will be required when, that will then enable those business cases that Mircea talked about to be clear in terms of what will be feasible and when, and that would be a really positive step forward for us as an industry. Just a quick note on onboard carbon capture and storage. Technically, it's feasible. It's around how do you, in a low carbon and low economic cost way, have an infrastructure that is enabled to capture that. If we start to see, and this is probably my final point, if we start to see the demand for fuels in other industrial sectors and the demand for carbon capture and storage in other industrial sectors, that creates the infrastructure that as an industry we can then piggyback on, and that will make it more cost effective than anything we have to develop on our own.
Thank you. Andy, from your side, quickly?
The question's, is this going to work or not? Or
No, how do you see the new buildings
the new
trends
buildings, new
with
buildings.
the current...
Yeah, I would echo what Claire said in the sense that certainly clarity will be provided with the approval or the vote or however we're referring to it. But like I've been saying, I think there's going to be moments of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I think the story is far from over here. And there's going to be unintended things, the unknown unknowns that we're not really familiar with yet in terms of how the implementation of these different fuel technologies will be adopted. There's going to be a whole series of regional reactions, particularly in ports, to different types of ships when they're ultimately built. I think ammonia still has a long way to go to get sort of adopted from a safety perspective, even though new engine technology seems to be working in the right direction. But we at least internally have had issues with crew not being too keen to work on an ammonia-powered vessel for obvious reasons. And then, we haven't even talked about the energy density issues, which are going to potentially require a whole swathe of the industry's fleet to be rebuilt with different levels of fuel tanks or sizes of fuel tanks. So there's a lot of details yet to come. But should we be doing it? As I said, yes, but let's buckle down because this is going to be a stormy journey.
Thank you. Silke?
I think decarbonization is not an option or something it's nice to have. So coming from my company and also purely looking at container vessels, I do see a lot of efforts still going on. We have seen it first in the bigger size segment, a lot of dual fuel engines and orders on that one. Now we also transition in investing into smaller vessels, and also there we see a lot of orders actually with dual fuel engines. So I think there's a lot of commitment, and also we haven't stopped, my company in particular, but also in the industry on large container vessels, in investing in retrofits. It's still going on. We haven't stopped. And I think what we need to keep in mind that aside of the IMO framework, we still have Fuel EU Maritime coming up. We have EU ETS, we have the CII, we have so many other regulations. And if we don't take the chance now of having one global pricing system, we are really losing out on an option, because I'm afraid that otherwise we will have a lot of fragmented systems. Every country or larger countries together will roll out something else. And this will make it only more complicated for us as an industry.
Thank you. Thank you. Mircea?
A lot of it has been said, but just to echo, it's a lot easier to decarbonize the larger ships. Yep. As you move towards smaller sizes, the capital cost relative to the cost of the vessel, the amount of cargo space you might need to sacrifice becomes a lot more pronounced. So we see a trend where fleets will focus on first decarbonizing the larger vessels, and try to spread out some of those environmental benefits through formal or informal pooling or aggregation of the fleets as the most cost-efficient manner to achieve the first step of decarbonizing those fleets.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Thank you so much for the audience for listening in. Conversations like the ones we have had today help us to test assumptions, share solutions, and hopefully move the industry forward. Back to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you also from my side, ladies and gentlemen. We're almost coming to close, but yes, fantastic that everybody on this great panel could take the time during a very, very busy week here in London. I have a few envelopes that I will hand over in a moment to all the panelists, because as a token of appreciation, we've made a donation in the panelists' names to the Mission to Seafarers. And just as a side note, this is a very, very good cause to support. DNV has been supporting the Mission to Seafarers for quite some time. We can only encourage everybody in this room to do the same. Yes. A big thank you also to all of you for having been patiently listening in, but I hope you found it meaningful and worthwhile. And of course, a big thank you to a fantastic virtual audience as well. You've done a great job back home in your home office, out there, wherever you are right now. Thank you for tuning in. Quick reminder to everybody, you may download the Maritime Forecast at dnv.com/Maritime Forecast. Also, recording of today's session will be made available very, very soon. That's a big thank you and goodbye from my side to the virtual audience. Everybody in this room is now kindly invited to join us for a drinks reception to continue the conversations in a more relaxed setting. Looking forward to meeting you up on the 3rd floor. That's where the networking is going to happen in the Riverside room, and I believe also the rooftop terrace will be open to enjoy a beautiful view. So hope to see you there or at another DNV event coming up soon. Thank you for today. Take care. Bye-bye.